You're watching News at Prime. Let's look into this conversation now. The National Student Financial Aid Scheme admitting that student accommodation remains a challenge for the agency. This is 3 months into the new academic year. Scores of students are still without accommodation, with some forced to sleep at university halls as a result of the agency's accommodation cap of 45,000 rand per year per student. For this conversation now, we're joined by the NSFAS spokesperson, that's Ishmael Mnisi. Is going to join us in a moment. He's actually going to be physically here in studio with us in about a minute or two. But in the meantime, let's press ahead with the conversation with Asive Dlanjwa. He is from the South African Union of Students, the spokesperson there. Mr. Dlanjwa, good evening to you. Let's begin with your thoughts around what NSFAS has announced today, and that is that there is an interim measure for universities to administer these fees on behalf of the contractors that have been there. But it sounds as though, as the student sector, you are not entirely comfortable with this arrangement. Am I assuming correctly here?
Good evening, only to your viewers and your listeners, and to Ishmael. And thank you for having us. You are correct, only we are not in support. It is on record. We would have also met with NSFAS at least several times and we've maintained our displeasure and that we are not happy with the fact that institutions are going to be dispersing the funds for the next 2 months. And one of the reasons we make this is based on empirical evidence that institutions have generally, even when they had the responsibility to do this prior to the direct payment system, that one of the reasons we had called for a direct payment system, albeit that obviously NSFAS would mess it up, but it was because of the inefficiencies of universities to be able to pay on time. There was a year, I think it was 2022, when Univen only began paying allowances on the month end of April. So these are some of the things we're dealing with. Some of the issues we're dealing with was corruption, where institutions would claim more than that which the students needed. As a matter of fact, you will remember the case of the WUSU students. That student never went into the coffers of NSFAS and stole funds. That was a money that was being stolen, millions that were being facilitated by university officials and the service providers to try and siphon it out through that particular student. Yeah. So these are some of the reasons why we did not want institutions to handle this payment. Not in support of the direct payment partners who must not be misunderstood. We had said even prior to the independent investigation by Workmen's on several times, even on this platform, that we did not believe that those service providers had the requisite capacity to roll out, and the investigation would go on to exonerate us, but go on further to even say that those service providers were appointed illegally using taxpayers' money. So we had thought, and this was our suggestion, that the service providers must be expelled. We wrote it to NSFAS in December, but only asking them to come up with a plan of recourse. Up until today, there is still no plan on the table as it pertains to the payment, and this is why now we have to revert back to institutions.
Mr. Mnisi is in studio with us. Let's bring you into the conversation, sir. You have heard the Student Union SAUS. They are very clear. They're saying there is empirical evidence that universities are not efficient in dispersing these funds to students. Why this choice, therefore? Why this interim measure? Because that's how we understand it, as an interim measure.
Good evening to you, Xoli, and to Asive. Xoli, the scenario is very simple. We have had a delay in the submission of information from registration data from institutions, number one, and which ultimately affected the entire process of the disbursements of allowances to students. Now, if we did not approach our universities for the disbursement, the reality that SAUS also knows is that we were going to be unable to disperse allowances on time as we have done. We were not going to be able to, assist students to register, which we have done in January, including for the medical aid students, for the medical students, and also, currently, all the types of allowances that will be paid through institutions. We are not, it's not a measure of our likeness as NSFAS that we will use institutions as an interim measure to pay, but it is a logical choice that we have currently for our universities. It's a different scenario when you look at our TVET colleges, because the direct payment service providers are going to be used for those payments which will be made from the 6th of March this month. Of course, and why? Because there is no capacity within our TVET colleges to manage this kind of disbursements. But we've been assured by the universities that they will be able to facilitate these payments for the coming 2 months. And in our statement today, we even gave dates of the payment of these allowances, and some institutions already have done it. Yeah. And we anticipate that the last ones will be done around the 8th of this month. And whilst we also share the concern that SAUS have, we have discussed at length with them and about these current challenges that they are there. Asive will know, and the entire SAUS, that if disbursements were not going to be paid at this point in time, we were going to disappoint a number of students who rely on NSFAS for their survival at institutions, be it in accommodation or even the living allowances that already we have advanced.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to be quite brief with your responses. Time is against us. Asive, let's bring you back in. How long has this process been of waiting by students for these funds to ultimately hit their accounts? How long has this wait been?
Look, based on normally how NSFAS pays, the first payments are actually due on the end of February, because we appreciate that students are still registering in January and February. So we are yet to determine, obviously, this year how long that wait will be. And if we know for a fact, obviously, that not all students have received their allowances. I don't have the numbers here with me now. We'll probably have that to midweek. So we'll find out. However, we were expecting that all universities should have paid allowances by the 29th of February. We did hear commitments from the press briefing that some of them, I think the last one was SMU, that will make those payments today. Which means it would be about a wait of about 5 days. So that would be somewhat acceptable to us, assuming that those institutions are able to, against what they've done before, and they're able to pay on time. So that would be acceptable to us. But however, we're yet to find out exactly as to how efficient will the system prove to be. We base our assertions based on our experiences of the past few years when the universities have been dispersing those allowances. But in case this is the last time you are allowing me to speak,
No, it isn't. In fact, allow me to interrupt you for a moment. It isn't the last time you're speaking. As you're talking, we actually have images of students' suitcases that are stationed outside these institutions. In the meantime, how are these students, or where are the students being accommodated? What is the condition where they currently at?
Look, Oli, it's actually what you are probably seeing now is actually much better. The reality is that the registration period was marred with the gross injustice, especially as it pertains to the issue of shelter and accommodation for students. We have had students since mid-January who have been sleeping in train stations, in bus stations, in libraries, in political offices of various political organizations, and everywhere else who did not have accommodation. As things stand, it is a little bit better now because we believe, based on the numbers, if the numbers are accurate that we have been given, is that we should, there's about only 40,000 students out of the 1.9 million students, minus the 200,000 students that have been rejected, that have not yet received their outcomes. So what was happening was that the students, for the longest time, students were not receiving their outcomes of their funding. And as a matter of fact, they could not be accommodated into student accommodation. And yet they were supposed to be registering. Some of them, classes had already begun and their outcomes had not come out. And as a matter of fact, they had to be relegated to sleeping outside. So now we believe that if these numbers indeed represent, which we will make our own assessment, the reality, then those numbers would have gone down significantly. Not to say, obviously, that even a single student sleeping outside is acceptable, but I am trying to give you context that that is where we are. We are hoping that by the end of this week there should not be such a student, but we want to say we believe the situation will be much better now. But the past few month and a half have been absolutely horrendous for students awaiting their results and sleeping outside.
Mr. Mnisi, that's unforgivable. That is unforgivable, given that you are well aware of this problem. It's not the first time you're dealing with this problem. Why is it that you wait until students sleep in train stations? These are young people, some of them women, who can be vulnerable to crime. Why is it that this government, that constantly tells us that they are a caring government, that is not a sign of a caring government, where people are allowed to sleep in trains?
Maybe, Oli, in responding to your questions, let's analyze this situation. We have been informed by institutions, because when we had to find out from NSFAS side why some students have arrived earlier in institutions, then we are informed that there are some mischievous individuals. Some of them might have been student formations who informed students to bring their bags, come to camp on campus, even at the beginning of the registration process. Now, our intervention as NSFAS immediately thereafter was to request institutions to accommodate those students, regardless of whoever or whatever that could have happened at the time, to make sure that they are safe, because we knew that even though others might not have been NSFAS beneficiaries, that all students must be safe at all the times.
And now, so what was the message?
Now, the message from institutions, they did allocate a number of them. You know that we have intervened at CPUT, which is not part of our current pilot project, but we had to go there and understand the challenges that the institution has and intervene. And we accept that we do not want to see students unaccredited, unprovided with accommodation, given whatever the reasons might be. So there is that administrative problem that going forward we are going to resolve. NSFAS is piloting. It has not taken over student accommodation throughout the country, and I think we need to make that very clear. Institutions are still responsible. All we are doing is to make sure that the norms and standards provided by the Department of Higher Education and Training are implemented. Institutions, particularly private institutions that accommodate students, are accredited, and this is what we said we will do.
All right. Very quickly now, we are coming towards the end of this conversation. Let me ask you this question around the service providers that are still contracted to NSFAS to disburse these funds. There is a process to terminate their contract. And up until that contract or those contracts are terminated, there won't be a long-term solution to speak about. Where is that process of terminating the contract so that we can start dealing with a long-term solution to the problem?
Koli, you know that South Africa is a law-abiding country. We are following all the prescribed legal prescripts for us to terminate those contracts. And the board is hard at work, actually engaging with our lawyers on a mechanism for us to do so. We have made it public that we are indeed going to implement all the recommendations of the Werksman attorney's report, which amongst others includes the termination of this. But we are not going to do it without following proper legal routes, because we will be obviously deterred from actually doing so by the courts themselves. So we want to appeal to our students, to student unions, everyone involved, to be patient with the process. We know that it's taking longer than anticipated, but NSFAS will conclude these processes and will pronounce on the mechanisms that we are going to employ to disperse allowances to students on time going forward.
Asive Dlanjwa, you have the final word. Are you satisfied with that response around the termination of the contract of the service providers, whom you earlier expressed in any case that you were never in favor of these people receiving these contracts? Now there is uncertainty about when it is that these contracts might be cancelled because a legal process is underway. Does that make you feel comfortable in terms of a lasting solution to this problem?
No, absolutely not. But Ishmael will also know we have expressed this many a times. NSFAS, I think it was on the 19th of November, when they announced to the entire nation that they were terminating those people. You can count for yourself how many months later, and that still has not been done, irrespective of whatever legal processes. In fact, if you are saying they were currently engaged in this legal process, it is at this stage, maybe we would find some sort of a comfort. But all there is the term and the imagination of a legal process. There is no legal process in place, and that's why even the nation has not been brought into confidence as to what is this legal process that is in place. It's been already 4 months, no decisions have been taken, and yet we agree that these people have been appointed illegally using taxpayers' money, number one.
Can I quickly get him to respond to that? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
Are you lying to the public when you say there's a legal process underway?
No. We have appointed very smart attorneys, the ones that came with that report, to lead the charge against the service providers. That process is underway, Xoli. And unfortunately, NSFAS is not a court of law. We'll still have to follow all those due processes for us to cancel a contract. And we understand the impatience that the NSFAS, that SAUS has. But we are duly working on it, and it shall be concluded.
All right.
And we have explained to them what processes are those that the public knows that when you cancel such contracts, what is it that you have to do? And we will
It's
very
been
soon.
4 months, he says.
We will very soon.
It's been 4 months.
Of course, we
says.
are not responsible for the judiciary in terms of those processes. We have to follow those due processes, unfortunately. And because when we will simply cancel, we will know what will happen.
But money is going to waste.
No. Remember the services that they still offer, we expect them to do. So we're not paying them for services that they would not have offered. The only challenge here is that the manner in which they were appointed, which is what is under question. But NSFAS will not disperse any money
I have to
service
end the
providers
conversation
without them having worked.
All right. Asive, last words, very briefly, please.
Last words, only the NSFAS loan system, I think we must speak to it. We welcomed it, obviously, as an intervention for the missing middle, but we have said it and we must state it categorically that we rejected the imposition and the charging of interest rates. That is not what we agreed when we met with the department, even last year, even before it went to to cabinet. We said that the working class cannot be charged interest rates at the level at which banks are being charged. And this is what NSFAS has chosen to do. That is a declaration of war on the poor and the working class. If we wanted, we would have said students must go directly to Standard Bank, FNB, or whatever other bank. The reason we said NSFAS must intervene is because we understood this to be a social welfare program. So we reject the capitalist approach that NSFAS is taking to put chains that you can imagine only paying 600,000 rands, how long it will take you. So we are saying we rejected the imposition of those interest rates, and it is against that which we had submitted to NSFAS, and we believe that this is a declaration of war, particularly war against the poor and the working class.
Asive Dlanjwa, let me thank you very much for your time. He is a representative of the South African Union of Students, and in studio, sadly, I have to end this conversation. It could have gone on longer because the problems are just that many with NSFAS. I mean, there's a whole pilot project that we understand is now being put on hold, as told to Parliament. But we've got to go. Ishmael, Mnisi, let me thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure, Xoli.
NSFAS spokesperson.